Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited to be talking with you all today about literacy for all students and the work that's being done in Kansas City. Before we hop into our conversation today, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. First, feel free to ask any questions using the question box. We'll leave time at the end to answer as many of those as we can. If you need to leave early or just want to watch any part of the conversation back again, we are recording and we will be sharing a video once it is complete with all the registrants. And finally, we host a lot of conversations on a variety of issues. If you want to get notified about future events, be sure to sign up on our email list, and we'll drop the link to that in the chat. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists for today. So first we have Dr. LaTanya Franklin. She's the Chief Academic Officer of Kansas City Public Schools. And we also have Robin Henderson, Ph.D., who's the Chief Program Officer at SchoolSmart Kansas City. You might have saw in some of our communications that we were to be joined by Dr. Tricia DeGraff, the Executive Director at the Academy for Integrated Arts. She was planning on joining us today, but had to step away to attend to a personal issue. So I might kind of share some of the thoughts that she had shared with us prior to this meeting, just to make sure her voice is represented. So with that in mind, I'll tell you a little bit about Literacy for All Students. It's a Kansas City effort to help more children learn to read by the end of third grade. SchoolSmart Kansas City, in partnership with folks across the region, launched the initiative in response to persistently low reading proficiency rates across the city and region. At its core, LFAS, or Literacy for All Students, brings together schools, funders, and community partners around a shared commitment to improve literacy instruction in the Kansas City, Missouri metro area. So what that has included to date is supporting schools to implement high-quality, evidence-based reading curricula, investing in professional learning for teachers and leaders, supporting high-impact tutoring for all students in the participating schools, and creating structures for collaboration across charter and traditional district schools so that the work isn't happening in isolation. Bellwether partnered with SchoolSmart Kansas City to document how LFAS was designed and how it's taking shape in practice. So we conducted a series of case studies with participating schools, talked to many participants and leaders to understand the decisions that shaped the initiative, what early implementation looked like, and how relationships and partnerships were sustaining the work. Our goal was to not only describe what the initiative is, but also to surface lessons from Kansas City so that other communities and educators can learn. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit at a high level with our participants here, our panelists. I'm going to toss it over first to Robin. If you could tell us a little bit about what was going on in Kansas City before SchoolSmart Kansas City started this initiative in 2024. And tell us a little bit around how did you come to the conclusion that a citywide approach was the right way to address the literacy crisis in your area?
So Kansas City, which is probably not that unique from other cities like ours, we have quite a few LEAs, school districts, right? We have our traditional public school district, Kansas City Public Schools, and then we actually have 20 additional districts that are charter. And everyone was working, I believe, as educators to eradicate and tackle the challenges with literacy in their individual school sites, in their individual districts. But what we also know about the data in our footprint is about a third of our students change schools within a single school year. And so that means that a student who begins second grade in a Kansas City public school could also end up in a charter school across town. And so we realized that the way we were going to best, even though we can't solve for mobility, but to mitigate for it, was to approach this as a common city effort. And Kansas City is a city that rallies together and rises to challenges. And so we realized that if we came together as a collective, we could make impact faster because everyone was tackling and dealing with the same issues, dealing with how do we move the needle quickly for our students. And so we felt like if we got all of the brilliance together, in one space and approached it as a collective, we could move the needle faster. And so we looked at places like Mississippi who had seen gains, and thought if we did this at a localized level and invited our philanthropic and business and other parts of our community to step in and support our schools, because really this isn't just a school issue, right? It is a workforce issue, it's a public safety issue. And so that is part of what this has allowed us to do, is to raise the awareness for our larger community, to say that we all have a role to play in this, not just our schools and educators.
That's great. And Dr. Franklin, would you add anything around kind of what was happening before you all decided to participate in terms of how the district was approaching literacy, and also maybe some of the state initiatives that were concurrent with this effort?
Absolutely. So I think it was the perfect complement to support our district instructional framework that we had in place at the time and currently still have in place, which really centered around our 5 big rocks, with literacy being our number one rock. Additionally, we also started our Science of Reading professional development. We made that a requirement for all of our K-2 teachers. And so right at that time, we were really focused on improving instruction, but also building capacity. And I think that's one of the things that really drew us into this partnership, is that it wasn't necessarily a resource, but it really was an investment in people. And I stated that immediately when talking with Dr. Henderson about this, is that I did not want another resource. I really wanted something that would be sustainable and something that we would be able to see the benefits of long term. And that's one of the reasons why we were interested in the partnership, and felt like it was, like I said before, a complement to our instructional framework that we have in place currently.
That's great. Thank you. And when we just to give the audience a little bit more context, Robin, could you describe some of the concrete shifts that Literacy for All Students asks the system to make in terms of curriculum, instruction, learning, data use, and kind of tell us a little bit more about where those come from? I know we've mentioned Mississippi, but other kind of examples, or what you really were pulling out from Mississippi and what was a little different.
Yeah, so I think there was this perfect timing, as Dr. Franklin said, because the State Department of Education was, moving school districts towards high quality instructional material. So we didn't have to tackle that. Our districts were already thinking about that. Our state was supporting science of reading training, but we know that any training is only as good as then how it gets executed in the classrooms. And so we know the impact from years of research about how coaching improves teacher practice. We saw the impact of that in Mississippi. And I think the difference being that they approached it from a state level. And this effort has allowed each of the elementary schools participating to have a dedicated literacy coach. So someone who is a full-time employee of the district, who is job embedded with those K-2 teachers that Dr. Franklin mentioned, to now come alongside them to build that capacity in a pretty rapid approach. And so pulling that in, we also brought to bear additional tutoring resources. We know that our schools, particularly coming off of COVID and during COVID, had used a lot of their funds to support tutoring, but those funds were going away. And we know that if we're going to close the gap while also improving that core tier 1 instruction, we had to have a both and. And so providing the schools with additional funding to increase the number of students who could have access to that during the school day tutoring was something else we brought to bear as a part of this. And then providing ongoing professional development for those literacy coaches, and also for our building leaders. And what a byproduct of that has come is this beautiful community of practice that extends across both our district and charter schools. So it was really important for us. We know that sometimes schools are able to provide tutoring for students after school, but it was really important for us that we didn't have transportation or childcare issues as a limiting factor. And so really providing schools the opportunity and LEAs the opportunity in partnership to make decisions about what tutoring platform, what modality best met their needs as an LEA. And so we have schools that are using live online tutoring. We have schools that are using AI generated tutoring. We have schools that are implementing in-person tutoring. So it's been really rich to see the implementation that has been able to make the greatest impact for our schools and our educators and our students.
And so wanted to shift to Dr. Franklin. If you could tell me a little bit about, from the district perspective, what made you decide to participate after you were approached by a SchoolSmart?
Well, I'm all about expanding and acceleration. And so the first thing I thought about was this was an opportunity to reach more students. And I just did not want to miss out on that. I also appreciated the opportunity to engage our families too. When I think about one of the priorities we have as a district, it really is about engaging families. And this was a key way for us to be able to do that with this literacy partnership. There were so many factors that about the programming, about the partnership, that I thought would be beneficial to what we were already putting in place. But the literacy coaches, I have to say that was also a key component. We were just in the process of initiating having instructional coaches in all of our schools, because we knew we had several resources that we were utilizing to support student learning, but we also knew that we needed some additional support for our teachers. And so as we were moving forward with that, we thought about having yet another coach who is solely focused on literacy. It just felt like a no-brainer to me. It just aligned perfectly with the initiatives that we already had in place, focusing on our big rock, which is literacy, the foundation for all learning, but also ensuring that the support is there. So I think that is really the key. Our teachers, who are really doing lots of big work, participating in professional development, how are we also supporting them through all of this learning and through all of the teaching that they're doing with students and the additional intervention supports that they are providing?
That's great. Thank you. So it sounds like it was really aligned, which resonates with what Dr. DeGraff had also shared with us. She had mentioned that, and we heard this from folks, that the Leadership for Literacy for All Students initiative really complemented the work that the state was doing. While the state doesn't provide all the same resources as this program to all the schools, it does provide the letters training and across the state. And so being able to build from that foundation and then provide the kind of ongoing coaching was something that really attracted her when she was making the decision to participate as well. So I want to talk about one of the strengths of the LFAS model, which is the focus on cross-sector collaboration and the engagement from partners and stakeholders across the city. And when I say that, I mean, we have in the partnership, there are traditional public schools in 2 districts. There are charter schools and CMOs all working together. There's also funding from a whole host of different funders across the region who are working together to support different schools. And then there's partnerships that support each pillar. So partners who are helping with coaching, others who are helping to support high quality tutoring, et cetera. And so it's really a regional village approach instead of being siloed. And I wanted to ask you, Robin, first to tell us a little bit more about how you all came to that approach and kind of the benefits and drawbacks of bringing in so many partners and your role at SchoolSmart Kansas City and being that convener. And then I'll ask you, Dr. Franklin, as well, how the cross-sector collaboration has supported the work in the district.
Yeah, so I love that you use the word convener, because that is something I think here in the Kansas City area that we are known for, and a trusted partner. And before we, kind of solidified and put the ink on this, we really had done a lot of conversations, a lot of background conversations with leaders like Dr. Franklin, Dr. Collier, who's the superintendent of Kansas City Public Schools, Dr. DeGraff, and other charter LEA leaders. We talked with educators, classroom teachers. We talked with parents to really test the theory of change and the components of it. So I think it was always grounded in this sense of collaboration and shared voice and shared input and impact. And I think it's just because for us, we really do see this as our city and thus all of our students, right? Regardless of where they're sitting today, they still are all of our students. And I think it's that message that resonated with the funding community to step up in big ways to support this. I think it was evidence that collaboration was going to be important. Our initial cohort of 9 schools do represent both charter and district evenly. And that was intentional and really important to us. And we've continued as we are preparing even for cohort 3 to expand on that, but also continuing to talk to business and industry. We're excited that for cohort 3, we have our first corporate funder stepping to the table to support this effort. And then bringing in organizations that work directly with parents and families, both in terms of helping parents and families with leadership and advocacy, but also providing literacy resources to families in order to take some of that weight off of our schools to think about how do we share this. And so the reach has been broad, and I think it's resonating with our larger community that this is an effort to ensure that we have literacy for all students in our footprint, because you cite this in the case study that in our larger metropolitan area, we have 290,000 not fully literate adults. And so this can't just rest with Kansas City Public Schools. It can't just rest, but it really is going to take all of us and our partners like UMKC, who is providing the coaching fellowship, and New Leaders, who's providing the principal fellowship, but even seeing the collaboration across those teams and how they're collaborating with the curriculum and instruction department at KCPS. So it's been this beautiful, we're all working towards the same thing, and everyone is, I think, aligned. And it's been the perfect timing because it also aligns with where the state was moving, as well as where our schools and LEAs were moving.
That's great. It makes me think of something that we heard from your team when we were doing the research around kind of approach, a FOMO partnership approach, that you wanted everyone in Kansas City to have a fear of missing out, or FOMO, around being a participant in this study. And because you thought that everyone had something to give and everyone has something to gain. Is there anything else you would say about that kind of that approach or that lens that you bring to the work and in cultivating partners across the region?
Yeah, I think that is exactly it. And our funders have been big champions of that. They have said to other funders, where are you? Step up. I think about our newest corporate funder, Kiewit, which is an engineering firm that's coming to the table, and they're committed to saying to business and industry, we won't have engineers if we don't have literate students coming out of our schools. And so I think it just illustrates that. And some of our nonprofit partners providing resources around literacy into the clinics that service our communities, so that our families are not just hearing from their schools that literacy and reading is important, but they're seeing those resources show up in other places in the community as well. So I think it really is this amazing opportunity, and we're seeing people respond to wanting to come alongside and partner with our schools and our educators who've been doing this hard and heavy lift for quite a while.
And Dr. Franklin, what would you add around how the kind of cross-sector collaboration and the different partners has supported the work or created any obstacles?
Well, I would say on the surface, just having the opportunity for principals and instructional coaches and teachers to work collaboratively, that's always beneficial. They can learn from each other. They're great things that they can bring back into the district, or we share amongst our educator groups. But I think on a larger scale, it really speaks to the investment that is really needed, that this goes beyond just the school walls, that this really is something that we cannot and should not tackle alone. And I thought that that was an important component of this programming, of the partnership, because it speaks to an investment and it speaks to a wider set of ownership. It's not just what's happening in schools, but we all need to be involved and we all need to be invested in literacy because it benefits the whole community. It benefits the city. I also think there's an opportunity to educate others about literacy and what it means to invest in early literacy and really just understanding how pervasive it is in the community that we have a literacy problem that doesn't just rest with educators. And it really does require a community investment, a city investment. And I think that that's what the Literacy for All initiative is about. It really is about bringing all stakeholders together to really invest in our students and partnering with educators to get this done.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm thinking too of, I wanted to raise up something that Dr. DeGraff had raised in earlier conversations around another kind of advantage of this work is girded by the evaluation that's happening. So you've partnered with evaluators in Kansas City who are collecting data across LEAs, across the schools, and on attendance, on academic outcomes, on the teacher experience, doing surveys and interviews, and looking beyond, MAP scores to really see how is this implementation rolling out and what are the impacts of the initiative. And that's helping you all not only kind of iterate on the design, but also helping schools kind of understand what's going on in the region and learn from each other and kind of see some shining lights. A little bit about the research initiative.
Yes, and you had a moment of breakup there, Daniela. So whatever you did before, do that again while I share. So yes, it was important to us, and it is important to us. So one thing that I don't think I lifted up yet is the investment and the partnership and commitment to each individual school site is a 4-year commitment, because we know this is going to take time and change. And so I think that's important for people to know. And so while that is important to the work, it's also important to not wait till 4 years to see how's it going. So we partnered with the Urban Education Research Center here in Kansas City, which is a trusted partner in our region, to be that data collection, data processing point for us. And so in addition to obviously looking at the state assessment annually, each of the LEAs agreed to, as a part of this, to share their formative assessment data across the points in the school year with them so that we could look collectively at how we're doing in terms of growth and that movement year over year on our formatives as well. And so that has been, I think, key, because then we're able to share that back out with the group. I actually have an email in draft to send to Dr. Franklin and others today, looking at our fall to fall comparative from our first cohort. And so I think it continues to help us with that sense of how are we learning together? How are we growing together? And I think having those principles in the spaces together as we look at data, as we share those commonalities on those nationally normed formative assessments, to really learn from each other and think about how do we apply that over in this school that's working somewhere across town. And so I think that data piece of it is essential, not only to telling the story and the growth that is happening and what else is happening beyond just the one time a year state assessment, but it's also important to telling the story of what's working in each of these schools that's participating.
Dr. Franklin, in thinking about the data that you have received already, what's been helpful and what additional kind of data do you want to see as your schools continue to participate?
Well, I mean, I guess I have to be honest, we're constantly looking at data, and I would say we probably have more data than we know what to do with. However, I do think it's important to be able to extrapolate data for individual schools and to look at the grade level data. So we're looking at kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, these targeted grade levels, because oftentimes we are looking at map data or we are looking at total school scores and looking at grade level performance over time. I think it's really important for our school system, but also for our individual schools and teachers who are participating. And so we've done that each year. We've looked at grade level scores. We've looked at our common formative assessment data, really just trying to target those specific students that we know were identified to participate in tutoring, but also all of our K-2 students who are essentially benefiting from the program, whether it's from the teacher providing instruction or from the support from the literacy coach. We recognize that all of our students are benefiting in some way. And what's really, I think, promising is that we are seeing the gains. We're looking at our K-3 data because we know that third grade is that target grade level. And our goal in KCPS is to have at least 50% of our third graders reading on grade level. And last spring, we had 40% based on our district benchmark assessment, which is the highest that we've had in previous years. This is my fourth year in the district. And so we're really excited about what that data is showing us. And just looking at our K-2 data as well, we're seeing those gains. I'm comparing spring to spring. I'm looking at winter to winter, not just fall to winter or fall to spring, but year over year gains. And we just looked at data recently. We are still seeing that progress. So that to me really just speaks to the intent. And I think it also speaks to the investment that our principals and our teachers and our coaches are making, because it really is about their buy-in and their implementation. They have to believe that this is important. And I think when we started, we had the right leaders and the right schools at the right time. And I think that's really why we're seeing the level of implementation that we've seen in those school sites.
And speaking of some of this data, I know that one of the data points that you all recently kind of got the results from was a teacher survey. Robin, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about some of the findings from that teacher survey and how school leaders and teachers have experienced participation in literacy for all students.
Yeah, so as Dr. Franklin said, we are data rich over here, which is really exciting as we continue to tell the story year over year. And so in the fall, our teachers that are a part in the schools that are being supported through Literacy for All students participated in a survey. And that survey asked around their confidence level related to early literacy instruction, about their levels of training on letters, and also about how they were experiencing the literacy coach. Because even though we implemented and started in 2024-2025 school year, I tell people that Dr. Franklin, Dr. DeGraff, the others, we all built this airplane while we were flying it in the first year because of the rate at which we decided to start and the urgency we said we would start with. And so as a result, most of those initial schools didn't have a literacy coach in the first year. And so this year was the first year where all of the schools, the 25-26 school year, had a coach in place. And so in response to the impact, even in the early fall, teachers were saying that over 75% of them were saying that having the literacy coach in their building was game changing for them. And we actually, back in the fall, had a small group of funders visit one of the Kansas City public schools that's a part of it. And we had a teacher in that room who shared that really this idea of having a literacy coach is a retention strategy, that she was seeing other teachers feeling even more confident and supported having that extra resource in the building. And then when our research partner did a focus group with some teachers from the survey participants, that echoed loud and clear that for them at that point in time, it was the literacy coach hands down that was becoming the game changer for them. And we all know that educators want to do an amazing job for students. They want to be highly effective for their students. And I think having that additional resource just better equips them to do that. And I think we're seeing that. So we'll have updated data again in the spring, because that's a 2-time-a-year survey, 2-time-a-year focus group. But the teachers are saying that coach is having a positive impact on what's happening in their classroom practice and instruction.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And I wanted to add something that Dr. DeGraff had raised in an earlier conversation just around the impact of the principal fellowship. So principals are collaborating in their own PLC around how to support literacy instruction. And she shared that that's one of the pieces that she's heard has been most impactful for principals. They've been able to kind of learn from each other, folks from other district schools or charter schools, and bring elements back to their own school, including instructional rounds. And so it's also a big investment for the leaders in the schools. So, participating in LFAS and doing the work of improving reading is not easy work, but that for her leaders, that it's been really worthwhile. Dr. Franklin, would you add anything around anything you've heard about kind of how folks are experiencing the program in its first couple of years of implementation?
Sure. I think it's important to also talk about, some of the challenges, and I think that comes up a little bit later, but it is also aligned to what we're talking about as it relates to the literacy coaches. Implementing something is one thing, but implementing something well, I think, is what's most important. And so we've done a lot of things, but one thing I know that we've prioritized as a district, and something I'm really adamant about sharing with the superintendent, is that we're not just doing it, we're doing it well. And how can we do this better every single year? And when I think about the literacy coaches and the support that they add to the programming that we're providing, I think that has been very key. Just the logistics of scheduling tutoring for elementary students. I mean, just kind of put yourself in the mindset of what does this look like day to day, and the monitoring of that, making sure students are at school, making sure that students are actually engaging when they are participating in their tutoring session. All of those details really matter. And to have someone who is solely dedicated to making sure that's happening, I think it takes some of the burden off of teachers who are sometimes maybe wondering, is this really working? And are kids really doing what we're expecting them to do when they're having this time with their tutoring time? But having a coach who can work collaboratively with our teachers, who can support the intervention, I think that's a game changer. And that partnership between our teachers, the instructional coach, and the literacy coach, I think, is a dynamic way to ensure that students are actually getting the intervention that they need, but also the Tier 1 instruction that really is important to that.
Thanks for that. You mentioned challenges, and I do want to turn to challenges. So looking at the first year, year and a half now of implementation, what are some of the big challenges that have come up? What took longer, cost more, or required a different strategy than you initially expected?
I will name, and Dr. Franklin started it, tutoring. Tutoring, I think when we began the journey of design, we at SchoolSmart had one vision for how we thought it would roll out. And as we worked more closely with let's get it from paper to reality with our schools and school leaders, we learned that there wasn't one size fits all. There wasn't a cookie cutter way to approach it. But we also saw that, increasing the number of tutoring seats that were available, say in KCPS, where they were already doing some tutoring before we got literacy for all students off the ground. That expansion, how does that happen when you've already signed contracts and school year has already started? So that was one, I think, obstacle. I think for our schools that chose the online AI type platforms, it was still working through the technology of it. I think scheduling is always going to be a challenge, because what we know is we don't want students missing that Tier 1 core instruction to get the interventions, because that defeats the purpose. And so I think that continues to be and will continue to be the ongoing challenge. I think it's also the beauty, though, of being this community of practice, because they can now come together around this as a group of leaders who are all facing that same challenge. So I would say definitely the tutoring was a challenge. I think, as I mentioned before, the staffing of the literacy coaches. For those who are watching who aren't aware, everyone on this screen is, we didn't get a commitment to the funding until July of 2024. And we as a collective said, we're not going to wait. We could wait a whole nother school year, but our students deserve us as the adults, as the leaders, to move with urgency. So we're going to make it happen. And so as a result, though, as I mentioned earlier, most of our schools didn't have literacy coaches in place that first year. And now we're in year 2. And so it's just some of the growing pains of integrating a new person into your team, helping the full staff understand the role of the literacy coach, and getting that collaboration across instructional coaches that already existed and literacy coaches. So I think those continue to be opportunities, and our leaders are doing an amazing job at tackling those. And I think it's also the benefit of them having a fellowship together, because they are together monthly. They are working on these challenges together and learning together. But those are two that come to mind off the top of my head, Daniela.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you raised the timing issue and the challenges that created. When we were doing the research to inform the case studies, we heard, folks using phrases like building the plane while flying it, or kind of, fast start, things like that. And, we heard and have talked about how you did feel that your collective did feel that urgency, that even if you couldn't implement the way you wanted in that first year, you would still be reaching more students than none. But some of the drawbacks, of course, being that implementation was a little bit more difficult than it could have been. So, I think now in year 2, I'm wondering what things have gone more smoothly. Like how has it been different than that first year now that you did have a whole year under your belt?
Oh my gosh, Daniela, it's fabulous. We actually, I have an MOU ready to go to Dr. Franklin for the additional schools from KCPS that will be joining in cohort 3. And it's
Amazing.
February, right? I mean, just the timing of it. I think the opportunity to onboard our new leaders. So I've had an opportunity to meet with all the principals who will be joining cohort 3. It gives more of a runway for schools to plan for tutoring, to plan for the increase. In the case of each of the LEAs, they'll know how much resources they have to apply to tutoring that may expand what they had already planned to budget for. And they have a runway for preparation. We are finalizing the selection of literacy coaches as I speak. So I think it's allowed us to systematize the things, but in real-time feedback, and getting that constant feedback from Dr. Franklin, and I check in regularly to learn what's working, what do we need more of, how can we pivot, and so I think that constant iteration is also a part of this work.
Dr. Franklin, would you add anything to that around just kind of how year 2 is going compared to year 1, and any lessons you all have learned too in implementing?
Teaching is just hard work. I think we want to see big gains really fast, but we know that it takes time. And I think being able to keep our teachers motivated by sharing those celebratory moments where we do see the gains, I think that that's really important. One of the things I know that teachers had asked about is they really want to know how the students are doing. That was probably their number one ask. If students are participating in tutoring or students receiving additional support, how can I make sure that I know the progress that they're making? Or what can I do additionally in the classroom to better support the student? And are they paying attention? So it really comes down to just knowing what students are doing and knowing that all of these efforts are having an impact. And so that would be probably the number one thing that I would want to make sure of, is that we have more opportunities for teachers to really see how students are performing, more touch points. In addition to our benchmark assessment data, that's one data point that they receive. I think some additional feedback around how students are doing in tutoring is just one of the things that I know teachers are really interested in. But just in general, I think year 2 is always better because we know what to expect. And I think everyone's a little smarter, a little stronger. We built some muscle. But ultimately, it really is, we're motivated by the outcomes. When we know that this is having an impact, I think the pain points are worth it. So that then becomes a motivator as well. It's like we see growth, so we can do this, even if it feels hard at times.
That's great. And you mentioned kind of the time it takes to see change in education. And earlier, Dr. Henderson, you had mentioned that there's a 4-year commitment from funders. And I wanted to circle back to that because I think that's something that's special about this initiative is that you do secure that 4 years of funding so people do have the time to implement. Can both of you talk a little bit about the importance of that time and maybe from Robin, from your perspective, what it takes to convince a funder that that's a good idea and not too risky?
Yeah, we know that teaching people to read is a complex skill. It's a complex task, and it doesn't happen overnight. So it was really important to us that we secured commitments so our schools could kind of breathe and they would know that we're starting to see gains in year 1, in year 2, and often in funding circles in education. After that, the funding goes away and it's like, but we were just getting our legs under us. And so it was really essential to us that our schools not have to worry that they had to produce magical results in a year because we knew it wasn't going to happen. And we wanted our schools to feel that sense of support, but it also gives our schools an opportunity to do some self-assessment of what really is working. And as they think long-term in their own funding beyond the grant, it gives them a runway to plan for that and to think about how do they think about their budgeting. It also gives an opportunity, hopefully some of these things would end up with some funding from a state level that would relieve some of the burdens from schools over time. But it wasn't an easy sale to funders. I can remember a particular comment of saying things could change at the state capitol in 4 years. And I was like, yes, that is absolutely accurate. And that 290,000 number in our ecosystem will not go down regardless of who sits in a political seat. And so, and we knew that literacy wasn't going to stop being a priority. We are thankful that it's raised to a level of national attention. And everyone, I think, understands the importance of early literacy. And so I think once we had the initial funders say yes, I think it got easier for them to help others understand why they said yes.
I would just add strategically, we were looking for a commitment. So that was one of the requirements just going into this. We didn't want something that would end in a year. We didn't have a level of real implementation where we can see some progress over time. And so I would say, in my conversation with Robin, when we talked about this, that was one of our requirements is this a real commitment to the district? If we're investing, what does this partnership really look like? And I think that was one of the important factors for me personally as the chief academic officer for the district, is that we see all of these components in place for an extended period of time, because that really, to me, is an investment in our students. And so I would say that longevity, the commitment, the 4 years, we typically say 3 to 5 years before we can see growth and progress. And so let's see this thing all the way through. And so I'm glad we were able to do that.
Great. I want to ask a final question before we open it up to audience questions, which is just for when you think about leaders in other cities who may be watching this or may have read the case studies, what part of the Literacy for All Students initiatives feels most transferable, and what parts feel like they're Kansas City specific or won't be easy to copy in other locations, if any?
Yeah, I think it's all transferable. I think we just have to think creatively. When we talk about partnerships outside and that idea that you mentioned of FOMO, right? We have the Truman Presidential Library sits here in our backyard, and they didn't want to miss out. And they said, here's what we can offer to this literacy effort. And so as a result, they're offering an opportunity for all of the third graders who are participating in our school partnerships to visit the Truman Library to read like a historian, because they've been learning how to read all these years. Now come learn to read like a historian. And so I think, it's the opportunity to think creatively and to think as a community about how literacy impacts the health of your overall community, and what role can everyone, large or small, play to bring these components to bear in the local context. I think for us, it was really important that we go deep and go fast, because we wanted to touch all of our schools, not just one part of the public schools inside of Kansas City. And so I think difficult to implement depending on, who is that convener in your community that can bring everyone together around a table to think about this as a collective effort. I think that may be right now, it's, something I think SchoolSmart was situated to do here in Kansas City. I think it would be an opportunity for cities to think who has that convening credibility in their community.
That's great. Dr. Franklin, would you add anything?
From a district lens, I would say just ensuring that the system is prepared. I would say that this was a supplement to what we were already doing as a district. Our strategic plan indicates that literacy is a priority for us. We had already, invested in a standards-based viable curriculum. We have our common formative assessments. We had professional development that was required for teachers centered around the science of reading. Everyone in the district knew that our number one big rock is literacy. And so this companion to what we're already doing as a district, I think made it easier for us to move forward. And so just for districts that are trying to prepare, I think that it's really important that everyone in the district knows that literacy is a priority for the district. Here are all of the things that we are doing to support that. And then here's one more partnership that will help us expand that work. So that would be what I would offer to that.
That's great. I want to turn to a few questions we got from in the chat. The first one here is asks, how does the project impact current middle and high school students? And I know that the initiative is really focused on early elementary, but want to kind of pass it to you around the decision to focus it at those grades and how you all think about older students.
Yeah, I know all of our LEA partners that have older students, again, had efforts that are already underway thinking about literacy in those grade levels. I think for us, we know the role that, early literacy plays in student success. And so that's why we decided to start there, and knowing that many of our partners were very focused on how to ensure that that core instruction was solid for our kindergartners and first graders and second graders, in order to eliminate any gaps that might come along the way. I do know one of the byproducts that has kind of come is there's a tutoring partner that a number of our schools use for their tutoring, and they've started testing that out with some of their older students as a way to address some of those early literacy skills that upper grade students may be lacking, that are ripe for that type of thing. So I think it introduced a new possibility into the ecosystem that some of our partners are thinking about with middle and high school.
I would just add, sure. I would just add, as I stated before, ensuring that the system is ready. We provide high dosage tutoring 1st through 12th grade. So we've been providing that additional intervention support to all of our students And this, again, is the emphasis on early learning. And I think everyone understands that, at the foundation, it is early literacy. Students have to be proficient readers before moving through elementary school into middle school. But in addition to that, we do have a team of middle school teachers who are also participating in the science of reading professional development, specifically for middle school teachers, because we know the need is there. It doesn't just stop with kindergarten, first and second grade, nor does it just stop with elementary school, but we have middle school students and even some cases high school students who are not proficient readers, and teachers who are really interested in closing that gap, and they sit in the secondary seat. In addition to that, we've also looked at ways that even at the secondary level, how can our teachers support with small group instruction? We know that that's typically an instructional strategy that we see at the elementary schools, but it is a tier 2 support that all students can benefit from. So in addition to our partnership and this focus on early literacy as a district, as I stated before, literacy is a focus for all of our students. And so we've implemented strategies to address literacy from 1st through 12th grade.
That's great. Thanks for explaining that. The next question from the audience is around what does family and community engagement look like in the project? And I'd love to hear from you, Robin, around kind of the parent advisory council and kind of their input.
Yeah. So it was really important to us that we bring together a group of advisors beyond the conversations and check-ins I have with school leaders and LEA leaders to continue to give different perspectives on the Literacy for All work. So we established an advisory council that is made up of business partners, community, literacy org partners, LEA leaders, principals, teachers, and parents, and bringing parent voice to the table and really hearing about their lived experiences and thinking about how do we share these resources? What are the needs that families have? How do we meet them at their places of needs? And so we have some partner organizations that were already doing literacy specific work for parents and being able to connect them with our schools, but not just connect them with the schools. This grant allows the schools to utilize their supports and services at no cost to the school. And so that is, I think, has been a lift off of some of our schools, thinking about we have these trusted partners who can come in and run family literacy engagement trainings and supports for our schools, and that they take that lift of organizing off of them. And then we have, it's things that are what seems as simple as we had a one pager that describes the Literacy for All students effort. And we asked a group of our parent leaders that are on the advisory council to help us make it parent friendly. And so we are now finishing up production of that and the translation into multiple languages, because a number of our schools, both in the district and charters, have families who English is not their first spoken language. So how do we meet them at those places? And those are the kinds of lenses that our parents continue to bring to the conversation. So this really is about all of us together supporting our students to become successful readers and then eventually being on a path to live very full, successful lives.
And you mentioned translating into multiple languages. Another question from the audience asks about how Literacy for All students supports bilingual learners. So would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think in addition to the thinking about how are we doing resources for families in different languages, I think it's the benefit of having the coach fellowship and the collaboration and the coaching support. So each of the coaches not only participate in the fellowship, but they have an individual coach that works alongside them. And so for our coaches and our leaders that are in schools where they have bilingual populations, they have another partner to help them think about what does this look like in real practice and time and application. And so I think those continual conversations of how do we build the muscle, if you will, of our coaches and our leaders so that they can then better support our teachers in thinking about how they reach and support our students who are bilingual.
That's great. I'm going to squeeze in this one last question from the audience. I know we're just about at time, but one of the questions is they'd be curious to learn more about the materials being used in tutoring. Are the tutors using the same materials as core literacy instruction? Is the training for literacy coaching curriculum specific? And I know, in terms of the tutoring materials that, the kind of perspective has changed a little bit over time and has expanded, and that you've learned from what the schools are doing, but wondering what else either of you might add around that question.
Yeah, I would say that the resources that schools are using, I think they align and enhance their core curriculum and resources. They're not necessarily, in some cases they are an offshoot of that, but it really does vary from school to school and LEA to LEA. And I think they are continuing. I know from talking to one of the leaders in KCPS, right? They're looking very closely at the success and the rate of growth with the tutoring decision and how that's aligning to matching students' gains on their formative assessment. So I think we're all constantly questioning and asking, are the things we're doing the right things, and are we seeing the results from them?
And any last thoughts you want to add, Dr. Franklin, before we break?
I would just add that, just to maybe educate those who don't understand that, literacy gaps, in order to really address foundational reading skills that a student just may not have, really is a matter of multiple tiers of support for students. We want them to be exposed to tier 1 instruction because that keeps them on grade level. That is ensuring that they are being exposed to grade level standards and expectations. But then there are those tier 2 supports where we're filling in the gaps. And so we're accelerating the students' learning, not holding them back, but giving them more and filling in what they don't have. And so that tier 3 may not be aligned to the curriculum per se, but it really is adaptive to what the students need. And so when students take that baseline assessment, we figure out what students don't know. The tier 3 support is designed to fill in that gap, to focus on those particular skills. And so ideally, your multi-tiered system of support should include all of that: tier 1 instruction, tier 2 supports, tier 3 interventions. And so that is the system. And that's where we see students who may not be reading on grade level. That is the best way to get them into a level of reading proficiency.
Thanks for that. And thank you both for your time. We're at time now. It's been really wonderful hearing more about this, hearing your perspectives on what's been working and the challenges. And I'm looking forward to learning alongside you all as you continue to implement. So thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.